Wallpaper to die for isn't a metaphor. Arsenical wallpapers had run rampant throughout Europe and North America. Illnesses had begun to circulate and sickness reports accumulated. Doctors suspected arsenic poisoning, but few people understood how a decorating trend could make a home hazardous. So, how did arsenic enter the marketplace as fashion? And how did these bright greens become so popular before they finally faded out? The story begins in 1775. Arsenic was used as an ingredient for a new vivid green pigment called Scheele's green by Carl Wilhelm Scheele. Other pigments emerged, like Paris green, developed by Sadler and Russ for the Wilhelm Dye and White Lead Company, as well as emerald green. These pigments were prized by the commercial market because of their vibrancy and bright hues. The rise in the new pigments marked a new chemical revolution and an innovation.
It was revolutionary because it was a chemical dye rather than a natural dye. I mean, before then, people had used dyes like indigo that come from that are plant-based, and so it was revolutionary because it was chemical. It was revolutionary because it was a very deep, lurid green. I mean, it was a sort of very artificial sort of colour, one that doesn't occur naturally.
The Industrial Revolution and the invention of the machine printing had made these pigments cheap and widely available.
The arsenic-based pigments were readily available because arsenic was a byproduct of copper mining, and copper mining was a big deal in the 19th century. And then, once manufacturers found this use for it, then they were mining arsenic just for arsenic as well.
Arsenical greens were used in books, toys, and wallpapers. Its smoky cities dealt with the effects of industrialization. The color green was longed for.
And so cities were really dirty, gritty places. And I think that probably made the folks who lived in the cities really long for nature, or at least, a romanticized idea of nature. And so I think that's part of why the color green was so appealing. It was a color that connected them with the natural world, and they didn't have a whole lot of that in the crowded, dirty cities at that time.
Arsenic lace goods had become that of a pop culture trend. Many longed for and priced for goods containing bright hues. Luxury firms such as William Morris & Co. and Jeffrey & Co. scaled up the production of these arsenical wallpapers across Europe and North America. As arsenic lace goods spread, illness reports began mounting. The decisive reform required a social transformation rather than legislation. Consumers, amplified by campaigns and physicians, transformed that private sickness into public pressure that industry itself could not contain. Officials moved cautiously and reforms proved uneven, but public outcry made poison wallpapers a controversy that demanded action. The first sustained response was in 1851. Thomas Stuart Trail described a 3-year-old child who chewed scraps of Scheele's green paper and became violently ill. Then, in 1862, the Limehouse wallpaper death cited 4 children in one family dying shortly after a room was newly papered in green. From there, Henry Ledeby, a public health officer's analysis, found arsenic at roughly 3 grains per square foot within the wallpapers used to drape the walls. Manufacturing workers who handled these wallpapers would face even more severe consequences, such as skin eruptions, ulceration, and vomiting.
But on the other hand, you had Henry Carr and Jabez Hogg and Alfred Swain Taylor and other medical professionals or whistleblowers who were doing research, finding arsenic in products, and they were serving as expert witnesses in court cases.
As these incidents occurred, the reaction moved into public culture. Medical journals like The Lancet publicized such incidents to the broader public. The Lancet, led by Thomas Wackley, the lead editor, launched a press campaign against the arsenical prevalence in wallpapers.
So Wackley also suspected that his family had been poisoned by wallpapers. So he wasn't, and so did one of his journalists on the Lancet. They were the two of them. Both suspected that their families had been poisoned. So in a way, they were not disinterested in the true sense of the word. You know, they had an interest in this argument. It was in their interest to try to pursue this idea that arsenic was being given off by wallpapers.
Across Europe and the United States, these campaigns transformed arsenical wallpaper from a private suspicion into a public controversy, setting the stage for reform. In the United States, Robert C. Ketsy's Shadows from the Walls of Death became a major turning point. By circulating arsenical wallpaper samples alongside documented case evidence to audiences in America and Europe, Ketsy made the public finally realize that the era's most beautiful, intricately designed wallpapers could poison and kill the homes that they furnished. Reform, however, was uneven. Families would act first to strip wallpaper and avoided bright greens. Fears brewing amongst the public and the press campaigns had, in some cases, led to laws pertaining to the use and the manufacture of arsenical wallpaper goods. Germany's Imperial Law of 1887 banned arsenic pigments in wallpapers and clothing. Sweden placed bans that regulated sales, allowing wallpaper only below said arsenic thresholds. Elsewhere, however, British and the American states failed to pursue a law that banned the use of arsenic in wallpapers, with the British state only launching the Arsenic Act of 1851, targeting retail poison sales associated with criminal poisoning, but not arsenic within consumer goods itself. But because families started stripping and rejecting these wallpapers, industry would be forced to change and reform to meet consumer demand.
There was definitely a really active debate going on in the newspapers at that time, both in England and in North American newspapers. And on the one side, you had manufacturers and industrialists arguing that arsenic was a really important part of the British economy and that these products were perfectly safe to use.
But it's not really until public outcry over the use of arsenic in wallpapers kind of reaches a fever pitch that manufacturers and wallpaper producers, designers, etc. bend to public opinion and remove arsenic from not just green, but also from yellows, reds, other sorts of dyes.
William Morris of Morris & Co., a major distributor of arsenical wallpaper, dismissed the arsenic scare as witch fever. But it would only be until the 1880s that growing press pressure would influence Morris & Co. to stop producing arsenical papers. Industry began to adapt, marketing arsenic-free on their wallpapers, with major distributors like Jeffrey & Co. advertising non-arsenical wallpaper as safe for nurseries and sick rooms. And so, reform came, but not mainly through legislation. It came through consumer culture. As newspapers and medical journals campaigned against arsenic, public trust collapsed, and manufacturers were forced to respond. Yet, the arsenic wallpaper crisis is not a Victorian anomaly, but a pattern that still persists today.
Today, the 19th century and the 21st century are so different, where even today, manufacturers will adjust and change how they are producing objects and designing objects based on public health needs, and if the public puts enough pressure on manufacturers to change because they need to meet market demand.
Today, PFAS or forever chemicals may be repeating it. These cancer-causing chemicals used in pesticides and foodware are shown to be found in breast milk and present within our drinking water. With the recent legislation that still refuses to regulate its use, consumers now would be forced to start the change. The lead paint crisis still invoked today, despite its regulation, with the Consumer Product Act that bans lead paint in residential homes of the United States, yet is still lacking proper enforcement. The arsenic wallpaper crisis reflects a legacy that still persists today. When toxic products entered the marketplace, manufacturers marketed as revolutionary. Consumers, amplified by press campaigns and physicians, would ultimately pave the path for reform. This is Wallpaper to Die For, a legacy of consumerism.